you don't have this long UFC career, but you speak like a veteran of like 20, 30 fights in the UFC. And you've also shown a lot in just a few fights in the UFC. We've seen you dominate, we've seen you battle back from adversity. Um, where do you get this mindset from and this resilience? Is it from just competing your whole life? Do you have a sports psychologist that you work with? Where does this wisdom come from?
So I think there's a lot of factors. I appreciate you saying that. I think there's a lot of factors playing into that. Number one, my mental coach, Danny Patterson, is the best in the game, and I've been working with him for 11 years now. So we've had a long foundation laid here. This isn't me like trying to play catch up leading into a big a big event where I feel pressure and I'm like, okay, how do I deal with this? We've been dealing with this for over a decade. I then also took some time away from competing in MMA while I was at Team Alpha Male and took a coaching role. So I've cornered something like 25 fights in the UFC. I've cornered hundreds on hundreds of fights in MMA in general, whether it's professional, regional, amateur, whatever. Cornered hundreds of fights, but I've cornered like 25 UFC fights. So I think part of that comfort comes from, this might only be my fifth walk to a UFC octagon. One of them, one of those fights was Contender Series, but I count it. But might only be my fifth walk as the fighter to the cage, but I've made fight week. I've been there for fight week 25 times on top of my fight. So 30 times total. Now I've been to fight week. I've been to the poster signings. I've seen what media day is like. I've seen what it's like to cut weight at the PI or at these hotels and then go to the official weigh-ins and then the ceremonial weigh-ins and get on those shuttles. Like I know the people who work for the UFC. I've known these guys for years. They're friends of mine. Like, the blue shirt guys, like I know all these guys, and like, so this is comfortable. I've been here 30 times. I had like 25 dry runs before I stepped in the cage for my UFC debut or for my Contender Series fight. Right. So I have what I think is an enormous advantage over most guys where I feel like I've been in there 25, 30 times, but I haven't had the damage of fighting 30 times in the UFC. So it's kind of like this cheat code that I have. Right. And then the final thing is like how I changed maybe how I talk to myself, like that coaching time, I feel like changed how I speak to myself because I look at how I coach, like would talk to my, self-talk, negative self-talk before I got into fighting. And I was like, started treating myself like my own fighter, like I'm my own coach. I'm like, I would never speak to one of my fighters the way I was speaking to myself, like to get the most out of them. So why would I speak to myself like that? So now I feel like I have a lot better self-talk through kind of those experiences. But
Wow.